So Simple tutorial.
Good morning students, welcome to SST So Simple tutorial. Today we will have a quick revision of the chapter Contemporary Centers of Power. I hope you have read your book. Okay, let us start. My dear students, the Second World War was fought between two camps, the Axis powers and the Allies. The war ended in 1945 with the victory of the Allies. After the war was over, USA and USSR emerged as the two superpowers. But then a Cold War started between these two superpowers. In 1991, the Cold War ended with the disintegration of USSR. With this, the power relations in the world politics changed. The world that was so far bipolar became unipolar. There was no power that could seriously challenge the United States. The US became the sole superpower. The era thereafter has been the period of dominance of the United States. Now, there was an urge to ensure well-being, peace and security among the states. But this was not possible without the cooperation of other states belonging to the same region. Thus, groupings like European Union, ASEAN, BRICS and states like China emerged as significant centers of power. These powers could limit America's dominance, transform their regions into prosperous economies and play a major role in the world system. Today, we will discuss European Union. European Union is a union of 27 countries of Europe which are bound together through treaties. It is a result of agreement between the member countries to cooperate on political and economic issues. Let us see how it came into being. When the Second World War ended in 1945, Europe lay in ruins. Its cities were shattered. Its economies were devastated. European economy needed recovery. Now, the leaders of Europe were faced with a tough question, whether to keep fighting or forget about those old rivalries and move towards peace and prosperity. The answer to this question gave birth to European Union. So the European Union, dear students, is a success story of the emergence and growth of European countries from the ruins of their economy. Let us see how things unfolded. It is here that USA stepped in and assured all help to European countries in the task of their economic recovery. In 1947, US Secretary of State George Marshall proposed that European nations create a plan for their economic reconstruction and United States would provide economic assistance. So under the Marshall Plan, the Organization for European Economic Cooperation OEEC was established in 1948 and over the next 4 years, some $13.3 billion was provided by the US for European recovery. This help provided much needed capital that enabled Europeans to rebuild their economy. This OEEC now also became a forum where the West European countries began to cooperate on trade and economic issues. This aid of America, my dear students, thus also prevented West European countries from going into the clutches of the communists. Understood? In 1949, 10 countries of Europe formed a Council of Europe. Although it did not do anything significant, but it can be seen as one step forward in political cooperation. The next important step in the integration of Europe was the establishment of European Coal and Steel Community ECSC. In May 1950, French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman proposed the establishment of a common market for coal and steel for those countries who were willing to delegate control of these sectors of economy to an independent authority. See, such a plan was not only going to avoid any future conflict between France and Germany, but it also sowed the seeds for the creation of United States of Europe in future. So, West Germany, Italy, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, six countries, agreed to this plan and signed the Treaty of Paris in 1951, and thus ECSC came into being. The resulting ESCS introduced a market, single coal and steel market, with freely set market prices and without import export duties. The success of ECSC led to further steps of integration. Another significant step towards economic integration was the formation of the European Economic Community by the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Initially, it was signed by six European states, but subsequently more nations joined it. This treaty provided for the ultimate abolition of all tariffs and other barriers. All custom duties and restrictions were lifted between the six member countries of the EEC. This resulted in free flow of goods, men and capital from one country to the other. So basically, EEC was a sort of custom union that aimed to integrate its member states economically. The Treaty of Rome also established the European Atomic Energy Community, which is called Euratom. The purpose of Euratom was to develop peaceful applications of atomic energy. So, Treaty of Rome created both EEC and the Euratom. Thereafter, in 1985, Schengen Agreement was signed. This agreement led most of the European countries towards the abolishment of their national borders. That means building Europe without borders. This led to the creation of a common travel area in which there were few internal border checks. The next important landmark is the Maastricht Treaty that was signed in 1992. This treaty is the foundation treaty of European Union. It finally established the European Union. It had provisions for shared European citizenship, introduction of a single currency, for common foreign and security policy, and cooperation on justice and home affairs. So, this is how European Union came into being. European Union was not built in a day. It evolved over time. It was founded upon several treaties and has undergone expansion from original 6 to 27 countries today. Let us now see the influence of EU. Economic influence first. EU is the world's largest single market. It operates as a single market made up of 27 countries. Naturally, the size of its economy is also huge because it is the joint economy of all the member states. The EU is the world's second biggest economy with the GDP of more than $70 trillion in 2016, which is next to that of the USA. Thus, the economy of the EU is about 1/6 of the world economy. Its share of world trade is much larger than that of the US. That is what makes EU powerful and more assertive in trade disputes with US and China. Since its economy is so impressive, it becomes influential to its neighbors as well as in Asia and Africa. In the international organizations like WTO, EU represents itself as a unit. Member states do not negotiate individually, rather they do as a single bloc. In currency, Euro is the second most traded currency in the world, next only to US dollars. Hence, there is a possibility that it can pose a threat to the dominance of the US dollar in future. Next, political influence. The EU has political and diplomatic influence because again, EU is not one, but in fact 27 states pushing their agenda together. France holds a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Plus, It includes several non-permanent members of the UN Security Council. This has enabled the EU to influence some US policies, such as the current US position on Iran's nuclear program. The EU's use of diplomatic and economic investment has also been very effective in contrast to the US, which uses diplomatic as well as military force. Thus, EU has been effective as in case of its dialogue with China on human rights and environmental degradation. Let us now examine military's influence. The EU has no common military setup of its own. Militarily, the EU's combined armed force are the second largest in the world. Its total spending on defense is second after the US. One EU member state, that is France, also has nuclear arsenals of approximately 335 nuclear warheads. It is also the world's second most important source of space and communication technology. Let us now see the limitations of European Union. As a supranational organization, the EU is playing a very active role in world politics and economics. However, on many occasions, its member states are at loggerheads in relation to foreign and defense policy. We have the example of Iraqi invasion, when Britain and several new members supported the US-led coalition, but Germany and France opposed American policy on Iraq. Some members of EU are not happy as regards the adoption of common currency euro. There are apprehensions that euro will not succeed and may fail. Britain's former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher therefore kept the UK out of the European market. Denmark and Sweden have also resisted adoption of euro. This limits the ability of the EU to act in matters of foreign relations and defense. Let us now go to the next topic, ASEAN. Dear students, ASEAN is a regional organization. It was founded by the governments of Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand by signing the Bangkok Declaration on 8th of August 1967. Thereafter, its membership expanded and now it stands at 10. Brunei joined in 1984, Vietnam in 1995, Laos and Myanmar in 1997, and Cambodia in 1999. Now, what are the objectives of ASEAN? The objectives of ASEAN are: first, to accelerate economic growth, to achieve social progress and cultural development in the region through joint efforts in the spirit of equality and partnership in order to strengthen the foundation of prosperous and peaceful community of Southeast Asian nations. Second, to promote peace and stability in the region based on the rule of law and principles of human rights based on the principles of the United Nations Charter. The fundamental principle of ASEAN is that there should not be any intervention in the internal matters of the member states and their sovereignty should be respected. One of the most important characteristics of ASEAN is called ASEAN Way. ASEAN Way refers just to the approach, or say it is the style of interaction that is informal, non-confrontationist and cooperative. So, it is a process of consultation and general agreement about how things should be done. Consensus is first. If there is no consensus, the members agree to disagree. They do not impose their opinions on member states who are in minority. When there is a dispute, the members set that matter aside and concentrate on cooperation in other areas. In 2003, ASEAN moved along the path of European Union by agreeing to establish an ASEAN community comprising three pillars, namely the ASEAN Security Community, the ASEAN Economic Community, and the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. The ASEAN Security Community aims to basically ensure that the countries in this region live together in peace. It is based on the conviction that outstanding territorial disputes among member states should not escalate into armed confrontation. That means they do not want the involvement of military. In case there is a conflict among member countries, they want that it should be resolved through mutual discussion and consultation. By 2003, ASEAN had several agreements in place by which member states promised to uphold peace, neutrality, cooperation, non-interference and respect for national differences and sovereign rights. During the Cold War period, ASEAN played an effective role in bringing peace in Cambodia. In the 5th ASEAN Summit held in 1995, they banned nuclear weapons in their region. As regards Burma, they do want restoration of democracy there, but they also respect their sovereign status. In 1994, the ASEAN Regional Forum, that is ARF, was established. This organization carries out coordination of the security and foreign policy of member states. That means it coordinates and ensures that the foreign policy of one state does not go against the foreign policy of the other. ARF was also meant to promote multilateral security dialogue with outside powers such as India, China, Japan, and European powers. India has become the member of ARF in 1996. Let us see the second pillar, ASEAN Economic Community. ASEAN is mainly an economic association. The objective of ASEAN Economic Community is to transform ASEAN region into a region with free movements of goods and services, investment, skilled labor, and free flow of capital. Efforts are being made to create a common market and production base within ASEAN states and to aid social and economic development in the region. So we can say that the goal is economic integration of ASEAN with the global economy. The economic community also likes to improve the existing ASEAN dispute settlement mechanism to resolve economic disputes. ASEAN has also focused on creating a free trade area FTA for investment, labor and services. Free trade area, my dear students, is a region in which countries sign a free trade agreement among themselves by which they maintain little or no trade barriers in the form of tariffs or quota among one another. The result is that there is increase in the flow of goods and services between countries. Understood? So such a step indicates that they want to boost trade in this region. China has already signed FTA with ASEAN. The ASEAN-India FTA also came into effect in 2010. Let us now see the third pillar, the socio-cultural community. This focuses on human aspect. It is all about realizing the full potential of ASEAN citizen. The aim is to build an ASEAN community that is committed to lift the quality of life of its people. ASEAN community endeavors to promote cultural activities. There is a regular telecast of cultural programs throughout the region. Mutual cooperation also increased in the fields of sports and higher education. Visa rules are relaxed to encourage tourism. ASEAN Filmfare Awards are also held. Understood? During the Cold War years, India's foreign policy did not pay adequate attention to ASEAN. But in recent years, India has started to work in this direction. In 1991, the Government of India had launched the Look East policy. This policy focused on ASEAN plus economic integration. In 2014, the Government of India had launched Act East policy. Act East policy focuses on ASEAN countries plus economic integration plus East Asian countries plus security cooperation. Security is an important dimension of India's Act East policy, particularly so because of growing China's assertiveness in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. The ASEAN-India FTA came into effect in 2010. When India launched Look East policy, India's trade with ASEAN was $2 billion. After signing the free trade agreement in 2010 with ASEAN, the trade has grown up to 72 billion US dollar in 2017-18. Let us now revise the rise of the Chinese economy. Students, China is one of the oldest civilizations on this earth. Before 1911, the political system of China was monarchy. China was ruled by the Manchu dynasty. After the 1911 revolution, led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the Republic of China, or simply China, was established as a sovereign state in the mainland of China. In 1949, in a civil war, the Communist Party led by Mao Zedong defeated the ruling party Kuomintang, also known as the Nationalists, and established their government and called it People's Republic of China, PRC. The defeated nationalists then fled to the island of Taiwan, a territory which it had taken control of from Japan in 1945, and since then Republic of China, that is ROC, remains the government of Taiwan. In the Civil War, the US was supporting the nationalists against the communists. Naturally, the US was not happy with this event and so refused to give recognition to the new communist government, whereas USSR became the first country to recognize this government. You must keep in mind the time period. Cold War had already begun between the US and the USSR. That is why fall of mainland China to communism in 1949 led the United States to suspend diplomatic ties with the People's Republic of China for decades. Until 1971, the People's Republic of China government was not accepted as the permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. This position was held by the Republic of China government, ROC government. Diplomatic recognition by the United States came only in 1978. In 1949, China's economy was not good. It was suffering from the ill effects of the decades of warfare. Many mines and factories had been damaged or destroyed. Transportation, communication and power system had been destroyed or had deteriorated because of lack of maintenance. Agriculture was disrupted and food production was about 30% below its pre-war peak level. As the nationalists fled during their defeat in the Chinese Civil War, they took away with them gold, silver and country's dollar reserves. Now, the immediate goal of the government was to restore the economy to normal working order. So what Mao did, he looked towards USSR and its leader Stalin for inspiration and based the economy on the Soviet model. He brought all the means of production and distribution such as banks, factories and commercial establishments under the state control. The state also took control of the railways, water transport and other industrial units. The agricultural land was distributed among the peasants. There was no problem of unemployment. The citizen had the right to work. Social welfare was assured to its citizen. The citizen had the right to state assistance in old age and also in case of sickness or disability. China was successful in giving food, clothing, shelter and primary education to its people. In 1958, Mao launched the second five-year plan, which is also known as the Great Leap Forward. It was intended to transform agrarian society to industrial society. Emphasis was to create heavy industries just like the Soviet Union. China needed technology and goods from the world market, but there was no foreign exchange to buy them. So China began to produce those goods domestically that it used to import. This way, China used its resources to establish the foundation of an industrial economy. The economy grew well at a sober rate of 5 to 6%, but the population was also growing at the rate of 2 to 3%. This growth rate was unable to meet the needs of the growing population. Even the agriculture production was not sufficient enough to create surplus for the industry. The international trade of China was as such minimal, per capita income very low. China needed export markets for her industrial goods. China realized that good relations with the United States could be a great help here. As such, at that time, the US was no longer involved directly in conflicts against communist forces in Southeast Asia, whereas there were border disputes between the Chinese and Soviet Union, which included several skirmishes. So it appeared to them that Soviet Union was a bigger threat, not the USA. So in the 1970s, Chinese leadership took some major policy decisions. Students try to understand the dynamics of international politics, see how the equation changes. Henry Kissinger, the US Secretary of State, paid a secret visit to China in 1971, which helped to improve relations. The United Nations recognized the communist government and gave them a seat in the Security Council. In 1972, US President Nixon visited China. This visit reduced tensions with the US, normalized diplomatic relations, and opened trade with the United States. Thus, by establishing its relations with the US in 1972, China was successful to end its political and economic isolation. In 1973, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai proposed the four modernizations: first in agriculture, second in industry, third science and technology, and fourth in military. But these were not implemented immediately because of certain reasons. During this time, Mao was not keeping good health and died in 1976. Mao was succeeded by Deng Xiaoping. He is called architect of modern China. He led China through a series of far-reaching market economy reforms. In 1977, the modernization plan as proposed by Zhou Enlai were adopted as a means to rejuvenate China's economy. The aim was to strengthen China in the fields of agriculture, industry, military, and science and technology. By 1978, Deng announced the open door policy. Open door policy means that they opened the door to foreign businesses that wanted to set up in China. This policy was meant to generate higher productivity by investment of capital and technology from abroad. Dear students, what is worth observation here is that unlike Soviet Union, China did not introduce market reforms at once but moved step by step. This is how it saved itself from shock therapy. So, beginning from the country's founding in 1949 until 1979, the economy was a centrally planned system which encouraged rapid industrialization while keeping the reliance on foreign economic investment relatively low. But with the introduction of SEZs, special economic zones, the country was allowed to transition from a centrally planned system to a capitalist market economy. In 1980, special economic zones (SEZs) were set up. This way, China became the most important destination for foreign direct investment (FDI) anywhere in the world. While many countries have set up SEZs, China has been the most successful in using SEZs to attract foreign capital. In 1982, Deng started privatization of agriculture. The results were very encouraging. There was a remarkable rise in the agricultural production and thus rural incomes. This acted as a boost to rural industries also. In 1998, Deng started privatization of industries. The Chinese economy, including both industry and agriculture, grew at a very faster rate. In recent years, China has been the second largest recipient of FDIs worldwide, attracting approximately $181 billion in 2021. China has accumulated massive foreign reserves. In 2021, the foreign exchange reserves in China amounted to over 3.2 trillion US dollars. With this much of reserves, it is making big investments in other countries. China formally became the member of the World Trade Organization in 2001. Thus, it got access to the markets of all member states. So, students, this is how economy of China rose. Markets all over the world are flooded with goods made in China. While the economy of China had developed so much, the benefit of development has not reached to all equally. Let us see some problems faced by China today. There has been a rise of unemployment with about 100 million people looking for jobs. Employment among women is also not good. Conditions of work for women are also bad. There is regional disparity in development. Economic development has been more rapid in the coastal provinces where SEZs are set up compared to the inland. Urban areas are more developed compared to the rural areas. Corruption has been on the rise. The rapid industrialization has led to environmental degradation. So these are some problems, and given the size and population of the country, problems will always be there. But one thing that we have to agree is that China has become an economic power. Let us now revise India-China relations. My dear students, China and India are two powerful countries in Asia. They are the two most populous countries and amongst the fastest developing economies in the world. The relationship between India and China is usually termed as Sino-Indian relations or Indian-Chinese relations, which means the bilateral relationship between India and China. People's Republic of China (PRC), dear students, as you know, was established by Mao in 1949. India lost no time to extend official recognition to the PRC and established diplomatic relations on 1st April 1950. Thereafter, an agreement was signed which recognized the 5 principles of Panchsheel for peaceful existence, and hereafter the slogan Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai became very popular. When the two new republics that came into existence in the mid of 20th century, there was a hope that they would come together to shape the future of developing world and particularly Asia. But that was not to happen. The communist rulers of China, dear students, had their eyes on Tibet from the very beginning. In 1958, there was an armed uprising in Tibet against China's occupation. In 1959, troops of Chinese army captured Lhasa in March 1959 and dissolved the government headed by Dalai Lama. The PRC government closed the monasteries in Tibet and imposed Chinese laws and custom in the region. In the same year, Dalai Lama, the spiritual head of Tibetan people, sought sanctuary in India. Indian government granted asylum to the Dalai Lama and a large number of Tibetans. So thousands of Tibetan refugees came to India and settled in Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh. This action of India was bitterly objected by China. China saw this act as an interference in the internal matters of China. In 1959, 10 policemen, while on patrolling duty, were killed in Aksai Chin. This is when India came to know that China had taken over Aksai Chin and had built a road from China to Tibet. This is when Indian government woke up and asked his army to patrol and control the borders with Tibet. When construction of road through the Aksai Chin was protested, Chow En Lai informed India that they do not recognize the McMahon line. This line was forced upon them by the British. And then in 1962, China launched a surprise attack on Indian territory. Indians were not prepared for such an attack. As a result, a good chunk of land went under the occupation of China. This event gave a serious setback to Sino-India relations. It damaged the mutual relations to such an extent that they have not become normal so far. In 1967, Chinese dared again to attack Indian posts at Nathula in Sikkim border. But this time India avenged 1962 properly. Indian soldiers inflicted huge casualties on them and drove them back. It was a great victory against China. So this incident strained the relations further. But in 1976, India took initiatives to improve relations and thus diplomatic relations were restored. Thereafter, Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi visited China and held talks with Chinese leaders in 1988. This trip is said to be an ice-breaking trip which played a very important role in resuming and developing friendship between the two countries. They agreed to establish a joint working group which would work to resolve the border dispute. Since then, both the governments have also signed agreements on cultural exchanges and cooperation in science and technology. They have also opened 4 border posts for trade. Talks to resolve border disputes are continuing. In 1996, an agreement on confidence building measures along the LAC was signed. Military to military cooperation is increasing. Indian and Chinese leaders as well as officials are visiting each other's sites more frequently, holding talks on a variety of issues like trade, terrorism, river water, environmental degradation, etc. So after 1967, the two countries did not go to war against each other for a long time. The border remained silent for about 50 years until Doklam happened, followed by Galwan Valley clashes in 2020. After Doklam incident, Indian Prime Minister had visited China in 2018. The meeting was aimed towards normalizing relations since Doklam. The Galwan Valley clash had resulted in the death of 20 Indian soldiers and an unspecified number of Chinese troops. After this incident, nationalist sentiments were very high in India. If you can remember, campaigns for boycotting Chinese products had started everywhere in India. Around that time, Indian government had banned some 200 Chinese apps also. But the trade between the two countries continued to boom despite border tensions following the military standoff in Galwan. India-China trade is growing at 30% per year since 1999. Bilateral trade between India and China have increased from 338 million US dollars in 1992 to more than 84 billion US dollars in 2017. Between 2008 and 2021, China has been India's largest trading partner. At this point, dear students, I think discussing relations with China without mention of Pakistan will be incomplete. See, China's closeness to Pakistan is also a matter of concern for India. In the light of present Indo-Pak relations, China giving military assistance to Pakistan is disturbing. China is the biggest arms supplier to Pakistan. About 47% of Chinese arms exports go to Pakistan. China assisted Pakistan in becoming a nuclear power. China and Pakistan had voiced their strong opposition after the state of Jammu and Kashmir was bifurcated into two union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh in August 2019. India has repeatedly registered its protests over the CPEC project, China-Pakistan Economic Project, which passes through Pakistan illegally occupied territory of Kashmir. But China is going ahead with its project, disregarding India's protest and sovereignty concern. So what I want to say is that if China distances itself from Pakistan in the interest of India, a new era of confidence may emerge between India and China. This is one. Then there are other activities that go against interests of India. For example, China opposes India's entry into the Nuclear Supply Group (NSG). China also does not support India's bid to become a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. China wants to isolate India in South Asia and limit her activities in South China Sea, Indian Ocean, and Arabian Sea. By constructing paved road in Doklam, China's effort to move closer to the Siliguri corridor is again a grave security threat for India. All of these are also a matter of great concern to the Indian government. Boundary talks between India and China continue but without any tangible outcome. Also, it is difficult to understand how boundary talks on one side and Galwan and Doklam on the other sides are going together. China no more seems to be trustworthy, so trust has to be built first. Resolution of border dispute must be given high priority. There should be an open debate and discussion on the intentions of each other in the regions of South Asia, Indian Ocean, or the Pacific. This is how trust can be built, and then only we can move further to collaborate on other issues like global health or climatic change, etc. Let us now revise the next topic, Japan as an emerging power. Until her defeat in Second World War, Japan was clearly one of the most powerful countries both economically and militarily. Japan was a devastated country at the time of its surrender. Major part of Tokyo and many cities had been turned to ashes. But after the defeat, the Japanese people had to start fresh since everything they had built during the war were destroyed by the war. Japan was occupied by the US forces after her defeat in the war. A new constitution was prepared which introduced a democratic parliamentary form of government and universal adult franchise. The institution of monarchy was retained, but the emperor was divested of powers and was made just a symbol of state. A new constitution renounced war as a national policy. Security of Japan rested on the US. However, Japan was allowed to keep a self-defense force. A number of reforms were initiated in the political system of Japan and society which laid the foundations of the post-war development of Japan. First was human resource development through education. They overhauled the education policy. The education system was reformed and its misuse for inculcating militaristic values were prevented. All teaching and research were focused on peaceful purpose. Much of the reform was focused on conditioning students to accept democratic, liberal and egalitarian ideals. Textbooks were changed. Then they carried out land reforms. The powers of big landlords were broken. These landlords owned large arable lands which they rented to the tenant farmers. The landlords were forced to sell their land holdings. The government bought these lands and distributed to the tenant farmers. This broke the class structure based on landholding in the society. The Korean War that began in the 1950s also benefited Japan. The US fought this war from Japan itself because US was already stationed there. Japan became the base and all orders for goods and services were assigned to Japanese suppliers. So all supplies used to go from Japan. Thus, Japan benefited from the war, although indirectly. Since Japan had few natural resources, it depends on massive imports of raw materials. So it must export to pay for its imports. Consequently, Japan paid her attention towards industries and trade. The industrial policy they adopted promoted industrial development and use of new technology. Rather than producing a broad range of goods, the Japanese selected a few areas in which they could develop high quality goods to produce in vast quantities at competitive prices. For example, camera industry, which since the 1960s has been dominated by Japan. Today, manufacturing is Japan's real strength. They import raw materials and process them to make finished goods, which are sold domestically or exported. Japan has made tremendous advances in technology, which has become her main asset. In many fields of manufacturing requiring high technology, Japan has surpassed every other country in the world. It is the first country in Asia where modern science and technology have developed to such a great extent. Japanese have the reputation for making high technology products. Japanese goods command great respect in the market. Japanese brands like Toyota, Sony, Fujifilm, and Panasonic are famous across the globe. This is the result of intellect and hard work of Japanese people. One of the most promising fields for future economic growth is robotics, in which Japanese technology leads the world. Japan had focused on the development of robotics since the 1970s. Japan had strong research networks in universities and industries. 7 out of 10 world's leading robotic companies are housed in Japan. Japan is number one industrial robo manufacturer, delivering 45% of the global supply. Asimo is a humanoid robot. Humanoid means its appearance and character resemble that of a human. That means it can run, dance, hop, and kick a football. It was created by Honda in 2000 to be a helper to people. It is displayed in Mirakan Museum in Tokyo. Asimo has retired in March 2022. Let us see the economic might of Japan now. In 2017, it was the third largest economy in the world. Its GDP is $5.08 trillion. As one of the economic giants in the world today, Japan is closely allied with its most advanced economies of the West in her economic relations. Japan has a security alliance with the United States since 1951. Japan became a member of OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, since 1964. Japan is a member of G7 and the only Asian member. G7 is the group of 7 leading economies of the world, which includes USA, UK, Canada, Italy, France, Germany, Japan, as well as EU. Although Japan's military expenditure is only 1% of its GDP, Japan was placed at 10th position in 2022 on global military spending. As far as contribution to United Nations is concerned, it is the second largest contributor to the regular budget of the UN, second only to US. It contributes almost 10% of the total budget. The growth of Japan reminds me of the mythological creature called Phoenix. This is Phoenix. It is said to have magical powers. It rises from the ashes. Prior to Second World War, Japan was a power. The Second World War turned it into ashes, but Japan rose from its ashes to emerge as a great power again. Let us now revise South Korea as an emerging power. Dear students, you must have used Samsung mobile phone sometime, or must have used the TV, washing machine, or the refrigerator of LG, or must have heard of Hyundai car. But do you know which countries these companies belong to? They are all South Korean companies. Today, South Korea is one of the biggest economies of the world. Its GDP ranks 10th in the world. The electronics goods produced in this country are exported throughout the world. During the Cold War, South Korea remained under the United States. It used to get aid from the United States. In the following years, North Korea showed some improvement, but South Korea's growth remained sluggish. Their growth was hindered by political upheavals and corruption. They depended mainly on the US aid. In 1961, General Park Chung-hee led a coup to overthrow the Democratic Party. Though he suppressed democracy and civil rights, he laid the foundation for the rapid industrialization of South Korea. He followed the policy of maximization of income through exports. This made the country export-oriented and dependent upon the market behavior of other countries. The policy of export-led growth initiated by General Park is still being followed by South Korea. Park built infrastructure such as highways because it was urgently needed to transport industrial goods. He encouraged industrialization and production of consumer goods. South Korea always followed capitalist form of economy, so the participation of state remained confined to providing infrastructural support to private enterprises. The government developed an institution for planning and framing policies to regulate the market. Park's administration then focused on growing economy by incentivizing private companies to increase exports and enter new industries such as the iron and steel, shipbuilding, and electronics. Incentives included easier access to foreign credit, subsidized loans, and tax breaks. The policy formulated by General Park paid good dividends. The growth rate in the period from 1963 to 1983 was nearly 8.4% per annum. However, it declined and rose again to 12.6% in 1986. When Park Chung took over the control in 1961, South Korea used to export goods worth $42 million, but this figure exceeded $10 billion till 1977. Labor was surplus in South Korea, which is always advantageous to industries, but the education provided by the government, added with the extensive vocational training, prepared the people to acquire the required skill. Korean workforce are rated high by foreign as well as Korean businessmen. So the export-oriented industrialization, involvement of private companies, infrastructural development, human resource development, all of them contributed to the economic development of South Korea, and between 1960s and the 2000s, South Korea transformed itself from an underdeveloped nation to a developed high-income country. South Korea emerged as a center of power in Asia. This story of economic growth of the South Korea is called Miracle of the Han River. In 2017, its economy is the 11th largest in the world. Its military expenditure is the 10th largest in the world. The economy of the country is mainly export driven, with the main products being automobile, electronics, machinery, ships, robotics, etc. The South Korean brands such as Samsung, LG, Hyundai have become renowned in India. According to the Human Development Report 2021, the HDI rank of South Korea is 20. South Korea became member of the United Nations in 1991. It is the member of WTO and G20. Because of its all-round development, South Korea became a member of the OECD in 1996. With this, we finish our quick revision of the lesson Contemporary Centers of Power. If you feel it benefited you, then please like, share and subscribe to it. In the next class, we will meet with a new lesson. Till then, keep reading and have a nice time. Thank you.